If your vegetables don't taste the way you remember, you're not imagining it. That flavor, the kind that made a tomato taste like a tomato, the kind that could stop you halfway through a bite. For a lot of people, it feels like a memory now, something that disappeared somewhere along the way. But that wasn't nostalgia. It was biology, and something very specific happened to it. Not overnight, but not by accident either. There was a cause, a mechanism, and interestingly enough, a quiet farming community in Pennsylvania that never lost what the rest of modern agriculture slowly walked away from. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly what happened to the flavor in your vegetables, why nutrition declined alongside it, and what Amish farmers have been doing for generations that helps restore both, starting in the soil beneath your feet. This isn't a gardening trick, and it isn't a miracle cure. It's the story of a living system that was interrupted, and what it takes to get it running again. Here's something you're unlikely to hear in the fertilizer aisle. A vegetable can look healthy on the outside and still be missing a surprising amount on the inside. Large, bright, nearly perfect. The kind of produce many people assume is better simply because it looks better. But a few generations ago, vegetables often looked very different. Smaller, less uniform, sometimes a little rough around the edges. Yet they contained something modern produce has quietly been losing. Minerals, flavor compounds, the nutrients your body depends on at the cellular level. Researchers comparing USDA nutritional data from 1940 to 1991 found that copper levels in vegetables had fallen by 76%. Calcium dropped by 46%. Similar declines appeared across many of the vegetables studied and across many of the minerals measured. To get the same nutritional value your grandmother might have received from a single bowl of spinach, you may need several bowls today. Your stomach would feel full. Your body could still be looking for nutrients it hasn't received. Scientists sometimes refer to this as hidden hunger, not the kind of hunger most people think about. Something much quieter, a gradual shortage of the trace minerals that support immune function, cognitive performance, and cellular repair, affecting people who genuinely believe they're eating well because their plates are full. And here's the part worth paying attention to. This wasn't simply the result of neglect. In many ways, it was the result of success. Agriculture became remarkably efficient. Fields produced more. Vegetables became larger. Harvests became more predictable. Food traveled farther and lasted longer. The system was optimized to maximize yield, appearance, and consistency. What it wasn't designed to measure was what might be disappearing inside the plant itself. The vegetables got bigger. The yields improved. But the nutrition moved in the opposite direction. And somewhere along the way, flavor followed it. You can hear versions of this story from gardeners all over the country. Someone plants a tomato variety their grandfather swore by. Same seed, same climate, sometimes even the same piece of land. The harvest looks beautiful. The color is right. The size is right. But the first bite feels different. Not bad, just missing something. Most people assume it's nostalgia. The research suggests something else may be happening. The question is why? And the answer begins not in a field, but in a factory. But before we get to the factory, there's something more important to understand. Because when most people hear that vegetables have lost nutrition, their attention immediately goes to the vegetable itself. They look at the plant. Maybe it's the variety. Maybe it's the seed. Maybe it needs a different fertilizer. So they make adjustments. They try something new. And yet the results often stay the same. Because the real issue was never the vegetable alone. It's the soil beneath it. For much of the modern era, soil has been treated as a growing medium, a place to anchor roots while fertilizer provides what the plant needs. Add nitrogen, Add phosphorus. Watch the crop grow. That way of thinking isn't completely wrong, but it's missing something important. Under every healthy garden, including the plots Amish families have worked for generations without depending on many of the inputs used in modern agriculture, there's a constant exchange taking place, and most gardeners are never taught to see it. Plants are far more active than most people realize. Every day, through tiny root tips, a living plant sends a large portion of the sugars it creates through photosynthesis down into the soil. Not because it's losing them, not because they're being wasted, because they're being traded. In return, a vast community of bacteria, fungi, and other microorganisms gets to work. In a single handful of healthy soil, there can be billions of them. Together, they help unlock minerals that would otherwise remain trapped in the ground. Calcium, iron, zinc, the trace elements that influence flavor, nutrition, and overall plant health. This exchange is what many soil scientists refer to as the plant-microbe relationship, and it's ancient. Long before agriculture existed, long before fertilizer factories, plants and microbes were working together underground. The partnership has been shaping life on land for hundreds of millions of years. That's why flavor isn't just about taste. It often tells you something about what happened below the surface. When a tomato tastes rich and complex, that underground exchange is usually doing its job. When it tastes flat or watery, the plant may be telling a different story. Not through words, through the quality of what it produces. And that brings us back to the factory. Because what happened in a German laboratory in 1909 didn't just change agriculture. It changed the relationship between plants and the living systems that had supported them for hundreds of millions of years. That laboratory produced something the world had never seen before, a way to pull nitrogen from the air and convert it into a form plants could absorb almost immediately. No composting, no long biological process, no waiting. For a world facing food shortages, it looked revolutionary. And in many ways, it was. Fritz Haber and Haber-Bosch helped make large-scale synthetic fertilizer possible. Crop yields increased, food production expanded, millions of people benefited from it. That part of the story is real. But there was another part that took much longer to notice. When synthetic nitrogen enters the soil, the plant responds almost immediately. Not because the fertilizer is harmful by itself, because the plant adjusts its behavior. Think of it like this. Imagine you've spent years working with a network of trusted suppliers. Every day there's an exchange. You provide something valuable, and in return they bring you materials you can't easily get on your own. Then one day, a truck starts showing up with a steady supply of those materials already delivered. Naturally, you rely less on the suppliers. The plant behaves in a surprisingly similar way. Under normal conditions, plants release liquid carbon compounds into the soil. These compounds feed microbes and fungal partners that help gather nutrients from the surrounding environment. But when large amounts of readily available nitrogen appear in the root zone, the plant often reduces those carbon payments. The exchange begins to slow. And when less carbon flows into the soil, many of the organisms that depend on it begin to struggle. Not overnight, not dramatically, just a little less activity, a little less cooperation, year after year. The fungal networks that once connected roots through the soil begin to thin. Microbial populations shift. The underground economy becomes smaller. And this matters because those organisms were doing far more than simply delivering nutrients. They were helping unlock them. You can actually see the difference when you dig into healthy soil. It doesn't crumble like dust. It holds together loosely in your hand. Dark, slightly damp, earthy in a way that's difficult to describe until you've smelled it. Gardeners often notice it before they understand the science. The soil feels alive. Most of the minerals a plant needs are already present in the soil. Calcium, iron, zinc, manganese. In many cases, those minerals aren't absent. They're simply locked away in forms the plant can't easily access. This is where microbes become essential. Certain bacteria release compounds that help dissolve mineral bonds. Mycorrhizal fungi extend far beyond the reach of roots, moving through tiny spaces in the soil and gathering nutrients from places the plant could never reach on its own. Some fungal networks can extend hundreds of times farther than the root system they're supporting. It's an extraordinary partnership, and it's happening beneath our feet whether we notice it or not. A single teaspoon of healthy soil can contain more microorganisms than there are people on Earth, each one playing a role in a system that scientists are still working to fully understand. Synthetic fertilizer didn't intentionally destroy that system.
The people who developed it were trying to solve a real problem, and they did. But the biological consequences were harder to see. You can't watch a fungal network disappear. You can't see microbial diversity decline with the naked eye. What you notice instead are the visible results: larger harvests, higher yields, full grocery shelves. Meanwhile, underground, the relationships that once connected plants to a living ecosystem gradually weakened. The soil became less of a living community and more of a delivery medium, exactly the way modern agriculture had been taught to view it. And over time, the plants growing in that soil began reflecting the difference in the only ways they could: through flavor, through nutrition, through the gradual loss of qualities people once took for granted. So here's the question that rarely gets asked. If this underground bridge had been working for hundreds of millions of years, if it was already helping plants access nutrients, build resilience, and develop flavor, why did so much of modern agriculture move away from it? The answer is probably less dramatic than most people expect. It wasn't a conspiracy, and it wasn't driven by bad intentions. The reality is much simpler. The benefits of synthetic agriculture showed up quickly. The costs took decades. Farmers saw larger harvests, more predictable yields, better production. Food became more abundant and more affordable. From the surface, it looked like a clear success. And by the time the hidden consequences started becoming visible, the system had already become the standard almost everywhere. But in parts of Pennsylvania, a different story was unfolding. The Amish never fully embraced the synthetic model. As a result, they never faced the same recovery process many modern soils now require. Not because they understood mycorrhizal networks, not because they were studying soil microbiology. Most of them simply continued treating soil as something alive. And that single perspective changed everything. While industrial agriculture focused on feeding plants directly, Amish farming traditions continued feeding the living system beneath the plants. The fermented rice water and milk serum used in many traditional biological farming systems introduced beneficial lactic acid bacteria into the soil. Those microbes helped suppress harmful organisms and supported the breakdown of organic matter. The aged manure did more than supply nutrients. It helped replenish microbial life. Year after year, it returned billions of organisms to the soil and provided the carbon-rich environment those organisms needed to survive. Livestock remained connected to the land. Organic matter stayed in circulation. The biological cycle kept moving. And most importantly, the underground relationships remained intact. None of these practices were really focused on the plant itself. They were focused on the living community beneath it. And that's the heart of the Amish advantage. Not a secret ingredient, not a special fertilizer, not a hidden recipe. A decision about what deserves to be fed first. Because when the microbial bridge is healthy, many of the things farmers are trying to force into a plant begin happening naturally. Minerals move, nutrients cycle, flavor develops. The plant gains access to the resources it was designed to work with from the beginning. The Amish didn't have access to better genetics. They maintained something different, an unbroken exchange between plant and soil.
And the flavor in their vegetables is one of the clearest signs that the exchange is still working. When the underground economy remains intact, plants are able to access far more of what the soil has to offer. And over time, that difference becomes impossible not to taste.
The good news is that the bridge can be rebuilt. Not overnight, and not with a single application, but often much faster than people expect. Because the organisms responsible for rebuilding it haven't disappeared completely. In many cases, they're still there, dormant, reduced in number, waiting for conditions that allow them to thrive again. Your job isn't to create the system from scratch. The system already exists. Your job is to stop interrupting it and begin supporting it again. That's where many traditional Amish practices offer an important lesson. One of the most common examples is aged manure, not fresh manure. Fresh manure can contain ammonia levels high enough to damage roots, along with pathogens that may contaminate food crops. That's one reason the USDA National Organic Program requires raw manure to be incorporated well before harvest.
Aged manure is different. After months of composting, the material becomes far more stable. Temperatures generated during decomposition help reduce harmful pathogens. Excess ammonia declines. What remains is a biologically active material, rich in organic matter and microbial life. And that's the important distinction. It's not simply feeding the plant. It's helping rebuild the living community in the soil. In many ways, it acts less like fertilizer and more like an inoculation. The second practice is one many gardeners have never heard of: lab serum. A culture of lactic acid bacteria, traditionally made from fermented rice wash water and milk. The process is surprisingly simple. Rice wash water is allowed to ferment. Milk is added. After several days, the mixture separates. A faint, clean, sour smell develops.
That smell is a sign that microbial activity has taken off. Billions of lactic acid bacteria are now present in the liquid. When properly diluted and applied to the root zone, these microbes can help suppress harmful organisms, accelerate the breakdown of organic matter, and support the release of nutrients that may have remained unavailable for years. What traditional farmers learned through observation, soil scientists are now studying in much greater detail. A diluted application, often around 1 tablespoon per liter of water, is directed toward the soil, where the microbial community actually lives. Not the leaves, the soil, because that's where the restoration begins. These practices aren't shortcuts, and they aren't gardening tricks. They're early steps in rebuilding a biological system that was functioning long before modern agriculture arrived. A system that, given the chance, still knows exactly how to work. An exchange that, in some parts of Pennsylvania, has continued with remarkably little interruption for generations. There are Amish gardens near Lancaster that have never depended on the kind of synthetic fertilizer programs common across modern agriculture. The soil in those gardens is often dark and rich, not because of a single product, not because of a breakthrough technique, because year after year, the biological system beneath the surface has been allowed to keep functioning. The plants growing there wouldn't always win a beauty contest in a supermarket. Some tomatoes have green shoulders. Some vegetables grow into unusual shapes. Some are uneven, ribbed, or slightly imperfect. The kind of produce that doesn't fit neatly into a commercial packing line. But many people who taste them notice something immediately. The flavor feels different, richer, more complete. The kind of taste that makes you stop for a second because it reminds you of what food used to be. And what many people describe as nostalgia may be something else entirely. It may be the result of a biological system doing exactly what it evolved to do. What those gardens represent isn't a return to the past. They're evidence that the system still works. That soil, when given the conditions it needs, can rebuild itself. That plants, when connected to a thriving underground ecosystem, can access nutrients in ways they were designed to from the very beginning. Flavor, nutrition, resilience.
not added from the outside, developed through relationships that already exist beneath the surface. And perhaps that's the most encouraging part of this entire story. Nothing about this system is new. It doesn't require a scientific breakthrough. It doesn't require inventing a better version of nature. It simply requires understanding how the system works and giving it the conditions to keep working. But once you understand that bridge, once you realize that flavor wasn't truly lost, only interrupted, another question begins to emerge.
If plants have spent hundreds of millions of years communicating with microbes, trading carbon for minerals, and building resilience through those underground relationships, what happens when we start breeding crops that become less dependent on those relationships? And if that process is already happening, what might it mean for the future of food?